Good evening. My name is Steve Guglielmana, and this is a video presentation. It will be for my Week 7 assignment for my Epistemology class at Cal Baptist University with Dr. Frederick. The topic will be about the sociological and psychological aspects of the Stanford prison experiment. It was conducted in 1971. The Stanford prison experiment took college volunteers and placed them into roles of either prisoner or guard. So this video will cover the topic and look at both a biblical story of David and Bathsheba and compare it to the Stanford prison experiment. One of the papers we were asked to read was a research paper by Haslam and Riker, and it was interesting that it was about prisoners taking over a prison and the psychology of resistance. They established that resistance was an important and common phenomenon worth studying. They proposed that social psychology had been so focused on the process of conformity that the topic of resistance was forgotten as a topic of study. So in the story of David and Bathsheba, we have a man named Joab who's in the story. He was in a position to do the right thing, but didn't, and ended up making morally incorrect decisions to support his king. He was under authority of him, from him in his role, and he kind of got a little delusional in doing and just following orders. So I found this was similar to the Professor Philip G. Zimbardo, who was conducting the experiment, but also took the position of being a prison superintendent. He was so involved in his role in this experiment, he was waiting for a coup to happen that was actually all in his head. He kind of lost touch with reality. Now, at first, when I was watching the images from the video for the Stanford experiment, it reminded me in my gut. It gave me that feeling of when I a long time ago watched the movie Clockwork Orange. There was just things that were happening in that I believe for me it came down to the lack of just civil decency. The ethical boundaries obviously were crossed, and it was upsetting to watch, just like the movie Clockwork Orange. In comparison, the guards in the Stanford experiment were given specific instructions on what to do and how it was to be done. In King David's story, you have Joab, and he's seemingly just willingly to follow through with King David's instruction. One may wonder that in both cases, each of the men went through some inner turmoil and tension, or did they simply obey blindly without recourse or hesitation? During the Stanford prison experiment, the guards in the experiment and the researcher himself convoluted the lines of reality and the experiment. While Zimbardo was sitting there waiting for this, coup to happen, basically, he was confronted by a colleague, and the colleague asked him, "What's the independent variable?" And he kind of got a little upset about it because he was so involved in his role. He was subjugated to the experiment himself. Harm was being done to the subjects, and this can be contrasted to the story where David was on the rooftop and gazed upon Bathsheba. King David then, he overstepped his reality of this being another man's wife. So one of his generals, he slept with Bathsheba, and she became pregnant. But that wasn't the big problem. The big problem was what happened next. Just as the guards pulled together to mistreat the prisoners, who were not actually even prisoners, but part of this experiment, David called for Joab. Joab, being like the guards in the Stanford experiment, went along with David instead of doing the right thing. So Uriah was unaware that his wife had been taken and was obediently serving David, and David basically sent Joab a message to put Uriah out into the battle where it was the hottest, and when he was out there in the middle of the hottest battle, retreat from him so that he could be struck down and die. So why did Joab go along with this so willingly? The Stanford experiment had to end in 6 days, even though it was scheduled to go for 2 weeks. Joab's misfortune ended with Uriah's murder, and consequently his demise also. They both demonstrate the frailty of the human condition and how we should identify our weaknesses and work on our own personal strengths in order to prepare ourselves for times when we're being put under trial. So when we're put in the position to waver from our moral compass, we can stand up and say no. We have to understand and know that some things are not right. Studies have shown, or they say that individuals who are in a perceived role of being under authority are willing to do immoral things. There was an experiment that was shown at the beginning of the video where we had some volunteers, and one was a student and one was a teacher, and so we would ask the questions, and if the student got the incorrect answer, there was an electrical shock administered, and it kept getting turned up and turned up. And so I was watching this guy, and he was visibly upset and just uncomfortable with it, but he kept shocking the other person, and he was like, "This is going to kill him," but he kept doing it, and it blew me away. It gave me knots in my stomach. But when we are under authority, we should be more perceptive of moral issues and act accordingly with responsibility. And the comparison was to the same as the Nazi death camps, and you could kind of see how that happened. Did those German guards follow orders even though they didn't want to go through with it? Or were they just, hey, yeah, we're gung-ho, we're going to do this thing? We need to have the courage and the fortitude enough to say, it's enough. Okay, this is my line, I'm not crossing it. But the biggest thing we can do is to continually subject ourselves to the ultimate authority of God. If we actively do this, we will be out from the world's dictatorship of our lives and subject to the King of Kings. The outcome of this experiment, I think, would have definitely been different had Zimbardo operated on faith-based principles. He could have set up guidelines, maybe to incorporate faith-based actions to help promote positive behavior on inmates, or even with the existing experiment, but meant by removing himself, watching for any signs of distress, to help step in to provide support and help with counseling for the volunteers. Well, thank you for watching. This is Coach Guglielmana. I'm signing out.